approach that many in our union has towards independence, because for us, people like myself, the campaign for independence is very much the same as the campaign against austerity. Nobody in PCS, in my opinion, embody this more than our next speaker. A member of our National Executive Committee since 2005. She's also the President of the PCS Scottish Government Group and one of the most passionate critics of the Westminster Government, Cheryl Gedling.
I'll still be that tenor at the end of it. Really, really delighted to be here today. And I think sometimes going at the end is not a great thing, actually, because I think people have made very, very important contributions today, and I don't want to repeat any of that in my own contribution. I did want to talk a bit today about kind of trade union perspective in particular. I think PCS, for those who don't know, is a civil service union, so you'll take from that we don't represent a particularly radical group of members, but we have been, at the forefront of the attacks since Gordon Brown, as a Labour Chancellor, got up in Parliament in 2004 to much cheering and waving from his own members, I would have to say, and announced 104,000 job cuts. And since then, it's been an absolute firestorm of attacks on not just our jobs, but our pensions, on pay, office closures. Just we really have been another place where you want to be at the forefront of the attacks. And in that sense, I think it's a really important point that John makes about our very positive alternative. It isn't just about what we are against, but about what we stand for as PCS. And I'll touch on that more in a second, but I did just want to start by saying that I had the dubious pleasure, when I was at the STUC conference recently, of attending a United with Labour meeting. I would have to say it was one of the oddest meetings that I've ever attended in my life, and I will unashamedly have an absolute go at the Labour Party today, because it was a really, really hostile meeting to be at. Unlike the Trade Unions for Independence meeting, which is an incredibly positive meeting to be at, and I guess that embodies the difference between the yes and no campaigns. But somebody, quite a leading figure in the trade union movement, said that as a feminist, as a trade unionist and as a socialist, she was voting no. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because as a feminist, a trade unionist, as a socialist, I'm voting yes. And I thought, she went on, I think, in any way to explain why that she was voting no. We've heard a lot of discussion about that today. And I think, certainly my own union, PCS, which doesn't have any party political affiliation, which work into the government of which Kenny is a part, I think is in quite a unique place, very kind of uniquely positioned, and really has to be at the heart of the debate. It's very, very important that we're not bystanders in this, that we continue to develop our own unique kind of anti-cuts and pro-working class platform for the referendum. And that, of course, means that we place demand on both the yes and no part of the camp, and we express the grievances and the aspirations of our class and of our members, and do all that we can to shape the debate. I think it is interesting to note that we had a very significant consultation process with our members, which led to us taking a position that we would not support either yes or no in the campaign, but we will continue to press our industrial demands and to keep members fully informed about that. What was interesting, hearing about what other unions are doing, particularly ASLEF, was that when of 80 PCS branches across Scotland representing nearly 30,000 members, not one branch supported a no position. That apparently in ASLEF, and you'd think they're probably quite the same as our members, not one of them supported a yes position. So you have to ask yourself, to be honest with you, where that's coming from. And I think one of the things I will say on behalf of PCS is, without fear or favour, we have informed members, I think, about the answers that we've had from politicians. And I do have to acknowledge in that, I'm certainly not here cheerleading for the SNP, but we have had an extension of the non-compulsory redundancy guarantee, not just to civil servants under the control of Scottish ministers, but very clearly by Nicola Sturgeon, by Alex Salmond, to civil servants if there is a yes vote in an independent Scotland. We also haven't had the facility time attacks, the attacks on trade union rights and terms and conditions that we have seen at Westminster. But that doesn't mean that we don't want more, Kenny. And I think when you referred earlier in relation to pensions, I think particularly in relation to our members in the Scottish Prison Service, a really important point about the age of retirement, about physically being able to work in that kind of job at the age of 66, 67, 68. Teachers have the same argument. I think I would flip that and say, if you're 60 and you've worked for 40, 41, 42 years, you're ready to retire. You should be entitled to a long, healthy and happy retirement. It isn't just about how long you work. Socialists within the trade union movement, what position should we take on the question of Scottish independence? And really that has to be influenced by, it has to be based on what the best interests, what positions in the best interest of our members. So as socialists, the question of national self-determination has to be posed by asking what's best for our class rather than what's best for our country. And I think that answers the point about this isn't about national boundaries, it's about what the best thing is for the class. We've already heard today that it isn't about boundaries and borders, it is about inspiring our friends, our comrades, our colleagues in England to a whole different kind of politics. And I certainly believe that a yes vote will do that. I think it's really, really important we take that to the heart of our debate as well. Capitalism, as we've heard, particularly from Colin, is riven now by its own internal contradictions. It's in deep, ongoing crisis. The context for us is austerity. And given, and I guess in that sense here, I am going to talk about other parts of the labour and trade union movement, the absolute lack of effective leadership, including workers, to lead British workers, including those in Scotland, not to oppose or ameliorate the race to the bottom, not to oppose austerity, and it is, my union, along with others, including the RMT, and other, unions with more of a socialist leadership, more of a socialist approach, not to accept that austerity is inevitable, and to say these are political choices, not economic choices. And we were called initially deficit deniers for doing that, and it's funny because we really kept going, and all this, now the TUC even has this kind of anti-austerity messages, and I think, hoping not being overly critical here, honestly, to get the TUC moving, it's like turning around the Titanic, so that's been really, really important to get the TUC on board with that. And one of our key anti-austerity messages is tax justice, because we all have to pay the tax that we're due to pay. Why should the wealthy, the rich in society be able to avoid and evade that? There isn't any difference between avoiding and evading, to be perfectly frank. I don't want legal, one's illegal. Both are immoral. We should all be paying the tax. Of this are our industrial demands, fair pay and pensions, an end to privatisation, tax justice, a fair and equitable social security system, free at the point of need and available to those who need it, defence of the welfare state, investment in public services, council house building, an extension of public ownership, an end to anti-trade union legislation. The problem is that these now sound like radical demands. These are perfectly legitimate and reasonable demands that we need to get to place these at the heart of our political agenda. And it's no surprise, I think, that demand for independence we're seeing is strongest amongst the youth, amongst socialists, amongst the most oppressed sections of the working class. And that's a reflection of people's need for effective political representation. And one of the reasons why we are able to have this debate, actually, I absolutely welcome us being able to have this debate. And the key position we're going to find ourselves on the 18th of September, when our destiny will be in our own hands, is because of the absolute lack of effective political representation for ordinary working people. And this part of the trade union movement is responsible for this as well, because I've not challenged anyway the political consensus that cuts and privatisation are inevitable. We saw this, I would have to say, to the shame of other leaders in the trade union movement, when hundreds of thousands of public sector workers took action on pensions on the 30th of November, to be followed by nothing short of a capitulation the day after that, achieving absolutely nothing that hadn't already been on the table. And I think members in the trade union movement will hold their union to account for that. When the Labour Party talks about further devolution, actually, just to give you a kind of brief story as well, Alex Salmond came up and addressed the STUC conference, as did Joanne Lamont. Alex Salmond was asked about the extension of the compulsory redundancy guarantee. He gave a great answer, actually. Politicians should do more of this. He said yes, so that was quite well. Joanne Lamont was asked about the same question about the extension of the more compulsory redundancy guarantee, and she said, we need an open and honest conversation about this. Joanne, where do you stand on the anti-trade union laws? Will you repeal them? We need an open and honest conversation about that. Where do you stand on tribal, Joanne? We need an open and honest conversation about that. The time for these conversations has long since gone. The Labour Party introduced PFI and PPP contracting to the public sector, saddling us with years of debt when these things absolutely should have been in the hands of the public sector. They're going to end exploitative 0 hours contracts. I don't know what 0 hours contracts aren't exploitative, and I don't understand why it's okay to be exploitative again. I think, in that sense, we have waited, I think, too long, too little, too late. I think also, as well, the promises of further devolution are empty promises, they're lies and myths. If we do not vote yes on the 18th of September, we will be punished, put back in our place in Scotland, and all of these promises will not be delivered. Why on earth, if we don't vote yes, would any other political party give us further devolution? It's a lie, it's a nonsense, and it needs to be seen for that. A no vote as well is not a vote. I love this slogan. A no vote is not a vote for no change. I'm not entirely sure that makes any sense, so maybe it's just so clever that I don't understand it. But this is one of the kind of United with Labour slogans as well. A no vote is a vote for austerity. A no vote sends a message to Osborne, to Miliband, to Bowles, to Cameron, to all of the mainstream parties, that we accept austerity in Scotland, that we see no alternative, and we're not prepared to stand up and fight. It is absolutely not credible for trade unionists, for socialists, to support this position. So our task as trade unionists and socialists in this referendum is to continue to raise our legitimate grievances, the aspirations of our members, the aspirations of the working class, of people who are desperate for an alternative to austerity and feel that they have no voice and that no one is listening to them. Nicola Sturgeon said something that I thought was really, really powerful when she addressed PCS Union's Scottish Conference in February this year. She said, from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 p.m. on the 18th of September, our destiny will be in our own hands. Are we really going to hand control back to Westminster at 1 minute past 10 o'clock? And I think that's something that was really, really incredibly powerful. So we can, on the 18th of September, vote for change. We should, on the 18th of September, vote for change. And more than that, we must, on the 18th of September, vote for change.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. You'd mentioned the PCS conference that we had in February. Well, not one single branch in our union backed Better Together. I have to say, we did have speakers for all three positions: neutrality, yes and no. And the speaker for no was the head of our parliamentary group, Neil Finlay, MSP. He's a perfectly nice chap, delusional but perfectly nice. And he did, in all seriousness, start this line about vote no for change. And by the end of the conference, it was trending on Twitter, vote no for spare change. So that kind of sums up the position nicely. I'm going to open it up now to questions from the floor, anything related to anything you've heard today, any questions that you have, any concerns that you have in relation to independence. We've got a radio mic here as well, so if anyone needs the radio mic, just give us a shout and we'll have it passed down. Okay.
I suppose, I imagine quite a lot of these questions are going to be directed towards kind of capital. It's natural. We don't often have a minister in front of us, I would imagine. Although we do have ministers from Scotland, much more commonly than we have Westminster ministers, I must say. We've heard an awful lot about austerity, about what's happening in the Westminster government, and I think it's important to remember that these things don't just come out of nowhere. The reason that these terrible policies are being inflicted upon us is because a capitalist class, run by, primarily through the City of London, has complete control over the Westminster government, parliament, establishment, etc. In an independent Scotland, how are you, as the first Scottish government perhaps, going to make sure that a Scottish capitalist class doesn't get the same influence over Holyrood and the Scottish government that they currently have over Westminster and the government next?
Well, I think first of all what I can say will be for the people of Scotland to decide what the first Scottish government will be. I'll be part of the government that will seek post-September the 18th to negotiate the terms and conditions for the establishment of an independent Scotland in March of 2016. The elections that will take place thereafter will decide what the government will be. I would hope and I will campaign for an SNP government that will be for the people of Scotland. Equally, I think it's as we've heard from every speaker, I think there's a different dynamic in Scotland, there's a different desire, irrespective of which political party, or parties form the administration. I think there'll be a clear intention to take us in a different direction. There might be variations in grades and pace at which we go, but I think we'll have an opportunity to start afresh to make sure, because to some extent, the problem south of the border is London is basically a global city. I have to say I feel remarkably sorry, I think Colin and others were touching upon it, about other areas of England that are left asunder because everything is sacrificed for what is basically sees itself as an offshore, almost a country in its own right. So there's a vastly different perspective. It will be for the people of Scotland, but it does seem to me that, first of all, I think one of the real consequences of this, and again, other speakers were commenting on it, we've got to make sure that after and when the polls close on the 18th of September, we don't lose that involvement. We are going to have a huge turnout for this. What we've got to do is make sure that they actually vote in the first election. To do that, then I think you're guaranteed that the government is going to be more reflective of the people of Scotland as opposed to people who have sat at home. And as I say, I think we then have the opportunity to go our own way. And equally, we have different views about what sort of society we want to see. But I have to say, I've always been very comfortable with a Scandinavian type society with social democratic, and even when the social democratic governments are no longer in power, governments that continue the ethos of a society that cares for everybody from the curator to the grave.
Yeah, I just wanted to come at far be it for me to defend the SNP's white paper, but I will. That it makes a change for me given the poor government brickbats sometimes in my blog, but I know I'm picking up on Maggie's point about, people are pretty good at honing in on the SNP's commitment to lower corporation tax, but that ignores the 4 other key pledges on tax that are in the white paper, including raising the personal allowance, removing the Tories' married couples allowance, which favours the best of families and punishes those who are not married. And most importantly of all, for me, the biggest one in there is that immediately, as well as moving more generally to a more progressive tax system, the first thing, if the SNP are in charge of the government in independent Scotland, is to start closing the tax loopholes with an aim to bringing in £350 million additional money into our revenue because they closed the tax loopholes. And these are pretty left to centre tax policies, and I think they're designed to be a flavour of what we could do differently in terms of dismantling some of the huge inequality gap that we have that's been allowed to be built in our society by successive UK governments. But actually, aside from the policy detail, to me the most important thing is almost, I kind of winced, to be honest, when you asked your question, because it was like, what are you going to do about it? And it's like, in the space of 5 speeches, we've kind of gone back to suddenly pointing at the politicians and all sitting back and waiting. And I'm just minded exactly how Cheryl finished about that really powerful point that Nicola Sturgeon made about, in those hours we take control of our destiny, let's not hand back control to Westminster at 10:01. Well, let's not hand it back control to the politicians and the political parties either, frankly. We have, Scotland is going through a period of democratic renewal. It is like the birth of a nation. I've never seen anything like it. People talking politics everywhere you go, people turning out, in small meetings, big meetings, small groups, different venues. It's amazing what's going on. Let's not hand it all back to the political parties and sit back and say, okay, what are you going to do for us now? Let's take control and make the Scotland we want to see happen.
Thanks. I think to echo many of Kate's points, I think one of the big things about this whole debate at the moment is the social movement, and I don't believe that even if politicians wanted you lot to go away after a yes vote on the 18th of September, that's even remotely possible. I think the social movement that has been built and is continuing to gather momentum, to gather pace, to gather membership, to gather support is really, really crucial. But I think there are some very, very clear structural things that we, collectively, the movement, can demand from whoever it is going into negotiation, putting forward ideas for the first independent Scottish government. And that is how we design our sort of constitutional future for Scotland. And we could leave it to a room full of 20, 30, probably mostly men, politicians to decide. Or we could say, let's do something different. Let's open it up to communities to actually be part of building our own people's constitution. And if you enshrine rights and powers for people and communities in that, then the corporations can't take over. It becomes legally and practically impossible for them to do that. That's not something that we've heard from very many. Well, I don't think it's something we've heard from the current Scottish government around, including in a very open way. It's, yes, let's consult, but actually no, let's get people to contribute. If it was good enough for the ANC in the 1950s, why is it not good enough for Scotland in the 21st century? I think having a people's constitution, because, KPMG and other big organisations, they can't wait to get their hands on designing Scotland's future, but we'll be the people who pay. So it's got to be our design and our plan, and all of us need to be involved in that fight.
Can I just say, it's a really good question, because let's not be naive here. Let's not at all be naive. The big corporations who dominate and control Scotland's economy just now, they may well be calling for a no vote. They may well be lining up behind the Institute of Directors, the CBI and all the rest of them, and they've come out and said so, Standard Life, etc. And I think what we have to avoid is like Fred Flintstone's cat. Remember Fred Flintstone and his cat? Fred Flintstone takes his cat and boot it up the arse and kicked it out the front door. And what happened? It climbed back in the window. In other words, the very people who are saying, we're against this, we don't want it to happen, 19th of September, we'll be battering Kenny McCaskill and Alex Salmon at the Else's door saying, we want to remain in charge. We want protection of our profits, 0-hour contracts, keep the anti-union legislation. Let's be honest about it. We all know that's the case. These people aren't going to change their spots just because of a democratic referendum, for fuck's sake, right? They're not going to do it. The difference is the relative balance of political forces means that they're a much weaker position after independence, because we've made it clear. We voted on the 18th of September for independence on a social democratic agenda. We have a clear understanding that the interests of the majority of the people of Scotland, the 5.3 million, were to be put in front of the corporations, KPMG, RBS, the oil companies that are still here, Brian Super Stagecoach, all the other corporations that we know are here. And we have to promise ourselves that in those circumstances, and I think this is critical, on the 18th of September there's a referendum. On the 19th of September, don't let anybody tell you that the biggest, most political grassroots campaign is all of a sudden demobilised. You just go home, leave it to us. We'll go to negotiate in London. We have to stay mobilised. I'm sorry to bring you that news. If you thought you were going out after Poland Day getting rat-arsed in a hanging bus and you thought it was going to drink yourself silly and celebrate independence, you've got to be serious here. These people are Fred Flintstone's cat. They will crawl back in Monday and say, we rolled with the punch. We didn't want to vote, but we're not going to give up that easily. And we have to ensure. That's what we've learned as working class people and socialists. We know who we're dealing with. We know what they'll try and do. And my feeling is, when that circumstance comes, The relative balance of forces between the social democratic movement, the trade union movement, the women's movement, the socialist movement, radicals in this country were far better proportions now than we face on a pro-rata British basis. And that's the answer to the question. I don't expect these people to accept a democratic vote. They've never done it ever. They're not going to do it on the 19th of September either. And I'm sorry to tell you, that means, as Maggie said, you cannot allow it to be left to the people in this platform or the political leaders you've elected, because they need to ensure that if KPMG are at Kenny McCaskill's door at 9:05 on the 19th of September, at 9:06, you're there with burning torches and there's 20,000 of you. You've got intolerable pressure. That's where I'll be.
Are you ready for that, Kenny?
You might be in your bed,
I'm having to follow that moment there. If we could continue the cat analogy, then I think the cat's out of the bag. I think for me one of the most fantastic things about this is that everywhere you go, people are talking about politics. Look at the number of 16 and 17-year-olds that have registered. You know, put into bed, I can't believe when people are saying, when we're talking about the extension of the franchise, do they know enough to vote? That's absolutely astonishing. Because the young people have been at the heart, I think, of the Yes movement and will continue to be. So these people have found their voice and now realise that their vote does matter and that they are important and that things can change. They can shift mainstream politics in a way that hasn't been possible for years and years in Scotland and in the UK. Realise how powerful they are, and I simply see no way that momentum will not continue. And never mind centre-left, how about left to centre? How about socialist? How about socialist Scotland? Because if someone tells me again that we should vote no because we won't get a socialist utopia, which is the worst reason I've ever heard for voting no, then, maybe we won't get that on the 19th of September. But if we push, and if we fight, and if we put our arguments forward on the kind of rational basis that we have, then perhaps it is possible.
Can I give you an example just to take on that? Because I'm actually, yes, we have to campaign and struggle, but once you indicate a direction of travel, you can change attitudes. I remember we were inherited, not simply the contract we signed for Edinburgh prison, it's scandalous. I don't expect to get that back, but we also inherited from Labour a proposal that Low Moss prison was going to be in the private sector. That would have put 40% of Scottish prison estate in the private sector. We wouldn't have been able to roll it back because you'd have been paying so much in revenue, you'd never have had the money for capital, and it would have seen a tilt over. So we pulled it back. The day after I announced that, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Prison Service got a call from the then owners of Kilmarnock Prison saying, would you like to buy it back? My response was, I'll take the keys back. I'm not buying it back. But the clear reason that they did that was they knew they had only been interested in actually seeing an expansion. When you only have one prison north of the border, the cost, the future, I'm pretty certain I'll get the keys handed back before the 25-year thing. So once you do that, you're always going to face challenges because these big corporates do want to, and they will, as Maggie and others have been saying, KPMG, we can do that, you can hive this off. But once you do that, that's why I'm confident, we can roll back with private prisons. And equally, see after 18th of September and a commitment, to renationalise the Royal Mail, they didn't want, and they don't want Scotland. They'll be happy to hire it off. They wanted London, Manchester. The last thing they want to do is deliver a letter in, Stornoway or, God forbid, Eriskay. I think they'll be happy to say, they'll have to make sure we don't, get taken cleaners by them. But they'll be happy to say, you can have it. We want these big metropolitan areas. So there's whole areas where they'll just say, there isn't a future there, let's target someplace else. Yes, we have to be, ever mindful. But I think that shows that once you set a political direction, you can change it, change the culture.
Gentleman in the back.
Yeah, mine's Jimmy Harrow. Now, you see, I'm a Scot, but I spent the majority of my life south of London in Kent. Vast majority of my life, actually. I went down there for 3 just came back 4 years ago. I'm voting yes. Yeah, I'm voting yes. I'm also going to say I'm a socialist. Okay? So, Colin and I were in the same party, in the Labour Party, both involved in the militant tendency itself, so never involved in the Scottish Socialist Party because I was down south in relation to it. I'm voting yes. I'm voting yes because actions that will take place with voting yes will have a spin-off effect in Scotland, just as the bedroom actions against the bedroom tax, just as the actions in Scotland here about the poll tax, which started in Scotland, which was a whole Britain aspect, but it was actually that anti-poll tax union started in Scotland and spread through England itself. So it will have an effect on England in relation to it. But you see, with all due respect, Jenny, you never answered that question. You prevaricated like a London politician, to be honest. So I'll ask you directly. Are you going to bring the oil, gas, the banks and the major industries into public ownership? So the fact that the Scottish working class can control their destiny? Or is it going to be left under private ownership, where the 1% controls the 99% of Scotland? Are we going to have control of our destiny by owning and controlling the means of